This is a moment in Jewish history. This week, I attended a Purim party at the old Shaare Zedek hospital on Jaffa Street in Jerusalem. There was music and people dressed in costumes. Just a week before, I was at the building to attend the opening of an art exhibit for the Jerusalem Biennale. But the building was used for quite a different purpose when it was dedicated in 1901. Today, the building is located between the Machane Yehuda Marketplace and the Jerusalem Central Bus Station, but back then it was considered very far from the majority of the Jewish population, which was centered in the Old City. The story of Shaare Zedek in its early days can be told through the lives of two people, the founder, Dr. Moshe Wallach, and the head nurse, Schwester Selma. Dr. Moshe Wallach ran the institution for 45 years. He was strictly observant, and the hospital today continues the tradition of upholding Jewish law. Born in Germany, one of 7 children, he studied medicine at the University of Berlin. He moved to the land of Israel with the dream of building a hospital. Dr. Wallach was known for being strict with himself and with others, but also for his generosity and dedication. The historian David Yellen wrote the following about him. He did not spare any labor from his soul day and night to visit the sick and spend money from his own pocket. Dr. Wallach was determined never to leave the land of Israel because he wanted to be there when Mashiach came. But he decided to return to Germany in order to raise funds for the creation of the hospital. He purchased land in what was then called the Shaare Zedek neighborhood. It officially opened in 1902 with 20 beds, an outpatient clinic, and a pharmacy, and was a 20-minute donkey ride from the old city. Shaare Zedek was considered the most sophisticated and modern hospital in the area. Behind the hospital building, there was an area for cows, so fresh milk could be provided. Dr. Wallach personally supervised the milking to make sure everything was strictly kosher. He also insisted on Shabbat observance. In a nearby field, wheat was grown for Shmura matzah. A sukkah was erected for the holiday of Sukkot with enough room for eating and sleeping. Dr. Wallach felt that Hebrew was a language for prayer only, and he spoke in Yiddish or German. When the Nazis came to power, he lessened the use of German. Dr. Wallach was a well-known and respected personality and knew both rabbinic leaders and Turkish and British officials. He worked long hours at the hospital and demanded long hours of his staff. He adopted a child left at the hospital. The father came from Syria riding a camel with a sick child. The mother had died. When the father never returned, Dr. Wallach assumed responsibility for her. Dr. Wallach never married. Once, a wealthy German donor to the hospital wanted him to return to Germany to marry his daughter, but Dr. Wallach refused to leave the land of Israel. He arranged for his brother to marry her instead. Whereas Dr. Wallach was known as a stern boss, his head nurse was known as a kinder personality. Selma Mayer was born in Germany and became known as Schwester Selma, or Nurse Selma. Dr. Wallach's 2 previous head nurses had left, one due to what she called the primitive conditions during the early years of the hospital. The other had fled the country during World War I. Dr. Wallach found Schwester Selma at the Solomon Hein Hospital in Hamburg, and she was hired under a 3-year contract. She stayed at Shaare Zedek for the rest of her life, training and supervising all personnel at the hospital from 1916 until the 1930s. She lived at the hospital in a small room and, like Dr. Wallach, never married. Several weeks after her arrival, Jerusalem was hit by a year-long typhoid epidemic. Shaare Zedek had 40 beds and added another 110 beds. Schwester Selma introduced European standards of nursing to the wards, including white uniforms for all hospital personnel, the changing of uniforms and bed sheets daily, and daily bathing of all patients. She outfitted personnel in overalls and hoods to protect them from typhoid infection. The following is from her autobiography describing the end of World War I. One day before the declaration of peace, the hospital was bombarded so much by the Turks that all the patients had to be transferred to the basement. There was no toilet and no washing facilities there. In any case, we had only cisterns for the rainwater, which was not clean and was only used for cleaning the floors. Everyone had a jara, an earthenware jug, with boiled water to drink on his bedside table. That time, we had to go to the basement on Shabbat of all days. How great was the joy when on Sunday the white flag flew. At once the patients were returned to the wards. Shortly after that, General Allenby arrived at our hospital in order to declare the peace here. Our hospital hall was the site of this historic act. He was then invited by me into the so-called salon, and tea was served to him and his aide. Dr. Wallach did not speak English well, and therefore the conversation was conducted in French. Immediately after the signing of the peace treaty, now, do not be too surprised, the Shaare Zedek Hospital became a democratic enclave in Palestine. A cleaning woman with the beautiful name of Dudu sturdily stood up in the hospital's main hall, proudly tapped herself on the chest, and trumpeted with a raised voice, "Now our time has come. The Englishmen are bringing us democracy. If you hear Dr. Wallach scream again, call me at once." And lo, it happened. He screamed once again, and dear Dudu came running. She, the cleaning woman, the leader of democracy. She went up to Dr. Wallach and said, "Why are you screaming again? Who do you think you are? You, a shtickle of flesh, and I, a shtickle of flesh. You work little and earn a sack gelt, and we work hard and earn little. That is the only difference between us. We must scream, and you must be quiet." Everyone standing around was amazed at the courage of this woman. Only Dr. Wallach himself, to whom this was addressed, laughed out loud, laughed so heartily as I never saw him laugh before. We had electric lights at Shaare Zedek before the city got any. The Solomon family from Holland donated a generator to the hospital in 1921. Dr. Wallach kept it for Shabbat and emergencies when the municipal electricity failed. Shaare Zedek was often called Wallach Hospital by the Jerusalem residents. Schwester Selma described Dr. Wallach's strictness as well as his kindness. She writes, "A woman was standing in the gate when Dr. Wallach was about to leave. She said, 'Oh, please let me in for 5 minutes. I want to see my husband who was operated on yesterday. Quickly, before the crazy Wallach will come, let me through.' Dr. Wallach replied, 'I'll take you up, but really only for 5 minutes. I'll wait for you at the door.' After 5 minutes, he called out to her. At the gate, she thanked him many times and asked, 'What's your name? You are such a kind person.' He answered, 'I am the crazy Wallach.'" In 1934, Schwester Selma founded the Shaare Zedek Nursing School, which Dr. Wallach initially opposed because he was afraid they would not get any practical hands-on experience. But he was proven wrong, and the school exists to this day, with an award in her name. Schwester Selma relates another story. One day, a lady from Vienna whom I had never met visited me. She had been sent to me by the mayor of Jerusalem, where she asked for my address for the following reason. "I have been commissioned by a woman whose sister was killed by the Nazis. She was married to a Christian. When her sister was being deported, she thought she would stay alive because of her marriage. Before being deported, she said to her sister, 'Here, take my diamond ring, and if I do not return, give it to a human being who has never married and has devoted her life to helping other people. This ring shall be a wandering ring, and the person who shall get it shall pass it on to another.' With these words, she took a large, valuable diamond ring out of her pocketbook and handed it to me with her blessings." During Israel's polio epidemic in the early 1950s, Shaare Zedek was the only hospital in Jerusalem with an isolation ward, and Schwester Selma trained nurses on how to use the iron lung machines. On the wall of her room, she had a poem by the famous Indian writer Rabindranath Tagore. "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was duty. I acted and behold, duty was joy." In 1975, Time magazine profiled her in an article on Mother Teresa and others they called Saints Among Us. It reads as follows: Schwester Selma Mayer of Jerusalem, age 92, is also revered as something of an angel, certainly as a tzaddik. She lost her mother when she was 5, and as she grew up, she became determined to give to others what I had missed, mother love and concern for human beings. Through wars and epidemics, she has been in Jerusalem ever since, always living at the hospital, often sitting up all night with a critically ill patient. She never married, seeing the care of suffering as her duty, but she did adopt and raise 2 daughters who had been orphaned like herself. In 1980, Shaare Zedek moved to its current facility near Mount Herzl, a state-of-the-art modern complex. The old building became the Israel Broadcasting Authority until 2017. Today, the building has been preserved and serves as a center for art, music, dance, Torah classes, and other cultural activities. This has been a moment in Jewish history. For questions or comments and past shows, you can visit benbresky.substack.com. Thank you for listening, and Shalom.